Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the virtual program today, Nonprofit Board Development with Dave Paule. I'm Brittany Spillman, and I serve as the Cary Center Director of Community and Collegiate Programs. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to thank this year's Community and Collegiate Program sponsors who have pledged to support our efforts providing meaningful programming for the nonprofit sector. Thank you to Auburn University Outreach, the Community Foundation of East Alabama, the United Way of Central Alabama, the River Region United Way, KPMG, Auburn University Outreach Office of Public Service, the Drummond Thorne Stooks Fund for Excellence, and a community service grant made possible by State Senator Randy Price and State Representative Joe Lovern. Dave is an experienced chief executive officer, fundraiser, marketer, writer, and educator with a track record of accomplishments in strategic planning, marketing, communications, product development, branding, e-commerce, and project management. He specializes in jump-starting stagnant operations, global business turnarounds, and building greenfield organizations. He joined our fundraising search as a senior consultant in 2020 and became principal and managing partner in 2023. Please join me in welcoming Dave.
Thanks, Brittany, and thank you all for letting me come and speak with you a little bit today. Our company, our fundraising search, does a good deal more than just helping organizations fund their missions. A big part of our organization value proposition is acting as a thought partner to nonprofits, and that includes helping build more effective boards. What I'm going to show you today is I'm going to walk you through a discussion taken from several different presentations that we do to help boards build their effectiveness. So with your agreement, I'm going to toggle us over to share my screen and start the presentation. And Brittany, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind. Can't always look at the comments while I am presenting on my laptop. So if something comes up that you think somebody asks a valuable question or makes a point, feel free to interrupt me and traffic cop the situation. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Brittany. Okay, so our conversation today centers on board development. Board development, depending on who you're talking to, means developing a better nonprofit board to support your mission. Some people also take it as helping the board understand their role in development and fundraising. So we're going to touch on both of these today. I always think it's important to tell anyone I'm speaking a little bit about myself in the beginning, just because I think as an audience, you're giving me an hour, you're entitled to know whether or not you should have any faith in anything I'd say. So as Brittany has mentioned, I have run 5 different organizations. I've been CEO of 3 for-profit organizations and 2 nonprofit organizations. I am on what I like to refer to as Act 3 of my career. Act 1 was 25 years in the aviation industry. Most of that spent with Delta Airlines. When I retired, I was the chief marketing officer for Delta Cargo, and the 3 for-profit companies I got to run were subsidiaries of Delta. In 2011, I retired and decided to get into running nonprofits because I thought it was going to be easier. I worked in the music field. I was the chief marketing officer for the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, the chief revenue officer for the Atlanta Opera. I ran an environmental nonprofit as executive director, and then spent my last 3 years of my nonprofit career as CEO and executive director of the Georgia Lions Lighthouse Foundation, a statewide vision and hearing NGO. Retired from that in the summer of 2020 to, I thought, just teach and consult. Georgia State University substantially expanded my teaching load, and I bought our fundraising search. So I am the only person in the world dumb enough to retire into 2 full-time jobs. I have spent a great deal of my career working with boards, both for boards as CEO and executive director. As a board member, I actually got I've been serving on for-profit, not-for-profit, and community boards since I was 17 years old, and which is like over 400 years ago, and also now as a consultant. I think I'd like to start when we talk about helping develop a board that really serves and helps a nonprofit. I think it's helpful if we begin by touching on understanding the roles. The board of the role is to govern. I'm sorry, the role of the board is to govern, not to manage. Now, that's surprise to many board members who think that, oh, their job is to come in to tell the executive director what to do. It's not. First of all, executive directors and CEOs to a great degree are self-managing. Second, the board's role is to govern. Governance is a posture that involves setting goals and giving power and holding management accountable for performance against those goals. The role of the board is to govern, not to manage. The role of the chief executive of the organization is manage, not to govern. And these are very different sets of tasks. Couple of basic tenets I like to put out, and as Brittany mentioned, I've sent her the slides. All of the slides will be available for everyone. My hope is if you're surprised by something you hear in here, that's good that you discover it. My hope is also that this presentation gives you some information for discussion with your own board of directors. One of the first things I think is important, and I always make sure boards understand up front, is that no one owns a nonprofit. By law in the United States, nonprofits, by virtue of the fact that we are exempted from tax and can grant tax write-offs to donors, by law, nonprofits are held to be owned by society and held in trust by their board of directors. The board has one employee, that's the CEO or the executive director. Everyone else works for the CEO or the ED. Their lane is governance. The CEO's lane is management. And this is, boards tend to rush to try to fill seats. The board of directors should be the executive director's most valuable tool. I like to make sure boards know upfront that a board seat is better left empty than filled with a bad board member. When I meet with boards to do governance training with them, a lot of times it's the first time that they have ever heard that they have legal responsibilities, legal duties, and ethical duties. So let's just review these to make sure everybody's on the same page. First of all, boards have legal responsibilities that they can be held accountable for by federal and state governments. They have a public responsibility as defined by the Internal Revenue Service. They also have a fiduciary responsibility as defined by multiple bodies of law, both nationally and at the state level. Further, boards have legal duties for which they can be held accountable by federal and state governments. Those are the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. I will walk you through those in a second. And then boards also have ethical obligations to run the organizations that donors hold them accountable for. I think in the world of nonprofit, I tend to refer to government contracts and foundation donors as like the Catholic Church. The foundations will not give to organizations where the board does not recognize their obligation to contribute time, talent, and treasure, their obligation to fundraise, and their obligation to advocate for the organization. Now, when I present this slide to boards of directors, someone will usually stop me and say, "Oh, Dave, you don't understand. This was never meant to be a fundraising board." To which I always respond, "No, you don't understand. Every board is a fundraising board." That is an expectation of the organization. That board member, by the way, hates me for the whole rest of the training, but at least they've heard it bluntly up front. Let's talk more about those duties or obligations: the obligation to contribute, the obligation to fundraise, and the obligation to to advocate. Most institutional funders require 100% participation of the board of directors as donors. They have an obligation to show up at meetings to contribute productively to organization success. Any funder is entitled to ask about that. They have an obligation to fundraise. I always like to make sure the board understands this does not mean we're sending you out to try to collect loose change from people in front of the Piggly Wiggly. It does mean you have to support the fundraising activities of the organization, that they have to use their personal influence and their network to help securing resources for that organization. And then they have an obligation to advocate. By being part of the board, they're making a commitment to the organization's success. That means that they need to communicate positively and actively about the organizations in the areas where they have influence. Now, a lot of times at this point, the board wants to ask me questions about the fact that they've got legal responsibilities, because a lot of times it's the first time that they've heard them. I came face to face with this with the last organization I was CEO of. That's the Georgia Lions Lighthouse Foundation, aka the Lighthouse. I was the 10th CEO, and the reason I was able to get the job was that the 9th CEO was in jail for embezzlement. She had embezzled her previous employer into insolvency. And when the board started asking questions, she quit and stole the books. Got a new job working at the Lighthouse as the leader of the Lighthouse. It took that previous organization, the Bartow County Health Initiative, 14 months of forensic accounting to prove that she had stolen the money and to convince the Bartow County Sheriff to arrest her. Sheriff, one day before Thanksgiving in 2016, drove down to our headquarters in Chamblee, Georgia, arrested her, hauled her back up to Bartow County. Our CFO at the time called the new board chair and said, I think you should know, Roberta's been arrested. Board chair left his job, drove over, asked the question, well, has she been stealing from us? And the CFO responded, I don't know, she won't give me the checkbook. As it turns out, she had been stealing from us. She stole about $250,000. More importantly, she stopped fundraising, which, I think is just a bad strategy. If you're going to take the money, you should make sure it's coming in. Now, when I came in, she pled guilty to the Bartow County case. When I came in, I started the forensic accounting with my CFO, proved that she had stolen the money. Swore out a warrant for her arrest. She was in prison already, so it was easy to find her. We also pressed charges, and she pled guilty to those as well. The interesting element was I was able to prove that members of the board were aware of her stealing. In fact, one of them in particular, the board chair, had benefited from it. And I had to have a very blunt conversation with the board saying, our officer and director insurance does not protect you for breaking the law or turning a blind eye to this. So if any of our donors come and sue us over what has happened, or if the sheriff decides to also go after the board chair or board members, we cannot indemnify or protect the organization. Those duties of care, obligation, loyalty, and obedience essentially say that the board is responsible for ensuring that the organization is run effectively, prudently, and in compliance with all laws. By the way, some people say, oh, well, you shouldn't talk about her that way. Like, no, she pled guilty. I'm fine with it. If you plead guilty, I get to refer to you as somebody who broke the law. I'm going to take us back into presentation. All right. So how do we ensure that we've got board members that understand their responsibilities, that we're recruiting good board members, and that we're building board members that actually help the organization? The starting point is training them. A lot of what I just talked about is the foundation of good governance training. We recommend that depending on your board cycles, boards get governance training at a minimum every 2 years. That if the board has greater churn, that you do it every year at the start of the fiscal year. We also recommend that boards develop a shopping list. I'm going to explain that in a second for how we look for new board members. When we've got new board members, we recommend that the board orientation include their legal responsibilities, their legal duties, and their ethical obligations. And that's part of their orientation process as soon as they join the board. The third thing we recommend is that the board needs to measure and report its own performance. Its own performance is tied to, first of all, who's on the board, who makes up the board, and how active are they? How active are they as board members in terms of attending meetings? How active are they in terms of being donors? How active are they in supporting the organization in its mission? The second thing we ask them to report on is the degree to which the organization is in compliance with all those legal responsibilities, legal duties, and ethical obligations. Ask the board to measure its own fundraising participation. And for those organizations that do it, ask the board to report on its performance against its own goals. Now, sometimes that is a surprise to executive directors, but it should be tied to your strategic plan. At the development of your strategic plan, we generally recommend strategic plans are 3 years. When we help a board develop a strategic plan, some goals get owned directly by the board of directors. For example, CEO succession planning. Every CEO needs a succession plan. Every board needs to know what happens if the CEO leaves, hopefully not get arrested like my board had to deal with. But it should have specific goals that the board itself owns and is held accountable to within the plan. Let's go back to that shopping list. Shopping list, boards have to be really clear. The best way to have an effective board is starting with the people who participate on the board. So often somebody gets added to the board because some other board member knows them and recommends them. You know, we should add Dave Paule to the board. He's such a nice person. By the way, I'm not. So we should add Dave to the board. He's such a nice person, or he's so effective at this. There's a vetting process that board members need to go through. The starting point before you can build that vetting process, for each organization, you have to build a profile of what great board members look like. And we're going to break down the profile, the shopping list, into 4 categories. First of these categories is demographics. So you can see this is a matrix that we use with our clients in helping them develop their board. You want to say, okay, you don't want to say the board should all be over 51 or below 35, but you do want to know who's on the board. So we say, based on age groups, we want to survey the board members. What age group do they fit into? If you have a board of over 60, where the entire board is over 65, that board has a succession problem. If you have a board where everybody is under 25, that board may lack experience in order to respond to challenges. So you want to say, okay, who do we have and where do we fall short? Gender, this is built on the gender binary. We've somewhat revised that going forward, but you want to understand the gender, the racial and ethnic makeup, and anything else that is really germane to identifying the diversity or lack of diversity of the board members. Now, that element of diversity is not just for the benefit of funders or the benefit of vision. And if you can tell, I'm in my office. I'm also, as I said, I'm the faculty at Georgia State University. I have been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work for over 30 years. There is a huge body of research that shows diverse teams are better at achieving goals, resolving problems, and communicating. Much of the research of that comes from the U.S. military. That under the Truman administration, when there was a lot of discussion of whether or not to completely desegregate the armed forces, there was a body of intellectual thought that said, no, homogenous organizations are going to be better at achieving goals and solving problems. The research showed that diverse platoons and divisions were actually much, much better than homogenous groups at solving problems, communicating, and achieving their goals. So diversity within any organization, but especially a board of directors, helps that organization be more effective. Second element that we look at when we talk about board recruitment is the assets. What are the resources or community connections that we need as an organization and that we bring to the organization? First of all, capacity and inclination to give is an important hallmark. Board members are expected to be donors. That's an ethical requirement. If a board member is expected to give time, talent, and treasure, that mix is kind of unique for every single board member. Some board members have more capacity to give money, less capacity to give time. Some board members have more capacity to give time and less to give money. We find that the boards that customize that, make sure that the expectation of you're giving all three, time, talent, and treasure, but customize the relationship with individual board members are more effective. We also evaluate what access do they have to funders or donors, what's their availability to participate, but also beyond the resources, what are their community connections? What are the connections that we need as an organization versus what are the connections that the board members have? This again is pretty unique depending on the situation you find yourself in or the actual mission of the individual organization. At our fundraising search, we work with a broad spectrum of nonprofits. We can work with virtually anyone in any mission. A lot of our clients, just by virtue of momentum and reputation, are private schools, in particular private secondary schools, a lot of which have a strong religious mission. It's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, we work with a lot of arts and social services organizations. So last year, I was doing a search for 2 executive directors, one for the Atlanta Pride Committee, which hosts our LGBTQ plus Pride every year, the largest one in the Southeast, and for a nonprofit Christian organization. In helping do board development for both of them, those organizations had some things that both of them needed. Both of them needed board members who had community connections to the business community. Both of them needed board members that had connections to foundations and philanthropy. Both of them had board members that needed connections to the political community. And what those political connections looked like were radically different. Both of them identified. They had those 2 organizations that you think would be mutually exclusive had much, much more in common than you would expect on the surface. Third thing that we look at is the actual behavioral qualities of a board member. Certainly they need to be passionate about the mission. We also want to evaluate what are their leadership skills, what are their ability to motivate others, how team oriented are they, what's their willingness to work, and personal style. Are they a good communicator? Are they a visionary? Are they able to deal with conflict in a mature, healthy manner? I think most of us who have led nonprofits have seen boards can go off the rails fairly easily. If we have a board full of grenade throwers, the last thing we want to do is add more to them. So when I was running the the nonprofit environmental organization. It was actually a nonprofit environmental law firm. And when I took the job, my board of directors was made up of 17 attorneys. I have an entirely new vision of what hell will look like. And our board meetings were wildly ineffective when I joined, because all they wanted to do was talk about case law. Now, starting point, I had to break them of that behavior. I couldn't wait for and the board chair was one of the worst about doing it. So I politely took control of the agenda, and case law was at the end. I'm like, these are the things you have to do first. You have to approve a budget. You have to, hold me accountable to the finances of the organization, which means you need to listen to the financial performance. You have to hear about development. If we do all of these other things, and the degree to which we do them quickly and efficiently, then you get to have dessert. And dessert was talking about case law all you want. That element of managing up to the board is kind of an essential role of the executive director, that you have to be pushy about the things you need for in order to run the organization effectively. Actually, before I go back, I should pause for a second before I go back into sharing the screen. Just a quick question. Are you all finding me helpful so far? Is this useful conversation? Okay, I'm seeing nodding. Good.
Yes.
Hey, thank you, Darren. All right, I'm going to share again.
I'm rethinking my commitment to being on a board, however.
The fourth element that we look at in evaluating our current board members and building our shopping list for the future one is, what's the expertise we bring. That board of the law firm had 17 attorneys, and admittedly they were broad in terms of perspective of attorneys. What we didn't have was anyone with financial background, anyone with marketing background, anyone with IT, anyone with strategic planning or marketing. We had and we had 5 open positions on the board of directors. And working with the board search and governance committee, first thing we agreed is we were not adding any more attorneys to the board. We had more than enough of those. We had to go find people who had marketing experience, who had environmental experience, who had experiences in other elements that we need. And generally, you want to break it between what's mission related and what the organization needs. I teach a course called the Executive Director Toolkit. It's to help new executive directors learn the scope of their job. And in nonprofit, we have a tendency to promote the executive directors based on technical proficiency. They understand the mission of the organization best, not necessarily the broad elements of being a CEO. Being a CEO is a generalist. You're the chief program officer, the chief marketing officer, the chief HR officer. Everything stops with you. By the way, in for-profit, they got away from that idea of technical proficiency as a requirement 40 years ago. Pilots don't run airlines, doctors don't run hospitals, lawyers, if they're honest with themselves, don't run their law firms. As an executive director, as a CEO, we have to be a generalist, we have to be broad, and we have to have people on the board who support us. So in building the shopping list, you have to be very clear. If you need HR support, then you want to make sure that you've got someone on the board who is coming from an HR background. All right, I can see some comments have come in the chat. I'm going to pause for a second before we talk about the board in their fundraising role. Do you all have any questions or comments or thoughts for me on this first part about making the board more effective? Okay, seeing none, then I'm going to assume I'm doing okay, and I'm going to keep going. Let's talk about the second element of board development, which is the board's role in development. How do you help the board understand their fundraising role? And the starting point, obviously, boards have to understand they're responsible for the success of the organization. No organization can be successful without money. Being nonprofit is a tax status. It's not a license to lose money. I have run both for-profit companies and not-for-profit companies, and I have learned running a not-for-profit company is much harder. First of all, our resources are more constrained, so we tend, or not tend, we're required to be more innovative and creative. Second, the performance criteria for the chief executive is not as clear in a non-for-profit as it is in a for-profit. And the third element is the barriers to board service are lower in nonprofit than for-profit. It's easier for somebody to get on a board in a not-for-profit that doesn't belong there. Now, coming back and talking to us about starting a board and helping them understand fundraising, I believe the best thing is to first start with the numbers. All right, so if you're not aware of this, the Lilly Institute and IUP every year do the charitable giving report in the United States. This is 2020 for 2022. 2023 is literally coming out in a week or two. The breakdown is relatively similar from year to year. Individuals usually give between 65 and 75% of every dollar contributed in the United States. So in 2022, just under $500 billion was given to nonprofits. 64% of that, which was down, came from individuals. That can be major donors, that could be annual fund donors, small regular contributors. Your events are based in there, even though events are not the best form of fundraising. Foundations typically account between 19 and 22% in any given year. Bequests account for 9%. Corporations only account for a measly 6%. Now, we've all had these conversations with our boards. First of all, boards don't understand foundations. They tend to think of foundations like it's an ATM. Go up and swipe your grant application and it spits out money. Foundation fundraising is actually some of the most difficult fundraising out there. Second one is corporations have a lot of money, and nonprofits believe corporations give more than they do. For corporate philanthropy is a form of advertising. It is basically given in order to, in some way, advance the organization. I do a whole different seminar on corporate fundraising. We can do sometime if you like. The best source of fundraising is individual giving. And so because between 65 and 75% of giving in the United States comes from individuals, we say 60 to 75% of an organization's fundraising activity and resources should be focused on individuals. I plan to tell you two stories out of school. When I was at Delta, I was part of the corporate fundraising activity. When I was when I was executive director and CEO of the Lighthouse, a member of my board of directors told the board chair and me that I should be talking to Delta. Delta's got a room full of money that they're just waiting for people to come ask them for. Having spent 23 years at Delta, I knew where everything was. There was not any room of money, and they weren't dying to give it away. It was tied basically to advertising. I also had a board of directors of, I do a lot of work in healthcare. A board member of a healthcare organization one time in a meeting said, "Dave, I believe, and I'm sure you will agree, that since we deal with terminal patients, all of our fundraising activities should be focused on bequests." And I looked at that board member and said, "No, I don't agree with that at all." It's like, "Whatever do you mean? We're serving people who are dying." I'm like, "How are you going to collect on it? You can't budget a bequest. Like if I'm budgeting on getting $1 million from people falling dead this year, are you going to expect me as an executive director to go out and collect on it at the end of the year?" That board member didn't like me for the rest of that conversation either. The second thing when we look at talking about the numbers is, where's the money going to? So that same $500 billion that was given in 2022, 14% went to human services, 27% went to religion, 13% to education, 10% to health, and so forth. Religion has historically always been the largest segment in the United States. It has also been falling consistently for 20 years. The third thing that I think is important is how, and this is something that many board members will get, but is not widely discussed in our industry. Giving in the United States, total charitable giving, closely mirrors the Standard & Poor's 500 index. In years where the S&P performs well, giving will be higher. In years where the S&P is low, giving will be low. And you have to look at it pretty much on a real-time basis. In 2023, the year finished up with the S&P being up significantly, but all of those gains came in the last 2 months of the year. That for the vast majority of the year, the S&P was really, really low. And as a result, charitable giving is going to come out in the report that was really low in 2023, except at the very end of the year. Now, if you're planning something like a capital campaign, this is important to you, that if we're in a year where the S&P is predicted to significantly underperform, depending on the economy, we may or may not advise a board to proceed with that capital campaign. Certainly, if the S&P is low, we will tell boards that you need to raise more money before you go public with your campaign. In the years where the S&P is really, really strong, you can go public somewhere. You've got to have at least 50% of the money raised. But depending on the performance of the campaign, if we're in a strong market, you can go public between 50 and 75%. If we're in a weak market, I tell boards not to go public until you've got at least 75% and preferably closer to 90 in the bank. This, by the way, is where, shameless plug, where consultants help you as an executive director. Consultants frequently can tell the board what they need to hear in a manner that you can't say it. All right, so let's talk about some of the fundraising basics that we use when we're training boards on how to fundraise. The philanthropic process is more about relationships than about money. We understand this as executive directors and fundraisers because we live it every day. Board members don't. So the starting point when we train boards is the reasons people give is because they were asked. They were asked by the right person, at the right time, for the right amount. That requires an immense amount of research on the part of the staff and a good bit of work in terms of figuring out who the right person is, what the right time is, and for the right amount. And board members have to be aware. Sometimes they're the right person. They may not need to be the one to make the ask, but they may need to be the one who's in the room when the ask is made. This is the philanthropic cycle. Most of you are familiar with these terms, but I like boards to get a chance to see it. Suspect is, by the way, not a term of art in fundraising. It's one that we use with our company. A suspect is somebody that you know nothing about. One of your board members says, hey, you need to go cultivate this Brittany Spillman. She's got a lot of money. We think she need to dedicate. All right. At that point, when you know nothing about somebody except who their name is, they are a suspect. The organization needs to conduct research on that individual to determine do they have capacity, affinity, and relationships with the organization. Does somebody have the ability to give? Do they have a willingness to give? And do we have a connection to them that we can go start talking to them? If they do, if they satisfy all three of those tests, they're now a prospect. Prospecting, an individual's prospect gets cultivated. We get to know that person. We introduce them to the organization. We talk to the mission. It's kind of like, it's like the process of dating, with the goal eventually of asking somebody for a gift. Call that solicitation, especially when we're talking about major gifts. I like to describe this process as being akin to asking somebody to marry you. By the time you ask somebody to marry you, they're pretty much aware the question is coming, hopefully. And if you've done it right, you're pretty sure you know what the answer is going to be going in. Once you have solicited somebody and they have agreed to make the gift to you, they are now a donor and they have to be stewarded, which means we have to maintain an ongoing relationship of showing them how we used their money, the good that they developed, and recognizing that we're going to ask them again. That's, the best source of donors that you've got are people who are already connected to the organization. You always need to be adding new donors as prospects, but you want to make sure that you maintain the relationship by stewarding the old donors. The two primary reasons donors stop giving to an organization is because they were not thanked or they did not believe the organization needed their money or their help. Stewardship is responsible for ensuring no donor fits into those circumstances. The board has a job to hold the organization accountable for good stewardship. The board also can play a great role in stewarding a donor. Sid James gave us a wonderful gift last year. You didn't have to ask her for the money, board member, but how about taking her to coffee to say thank you for her gift and making sure that she knows that feels valued and cared about. All right. Annual giving is where we put that individual donor money. It is the organization, it's the building block upon which organizations succeed or fail. As I said, it should account for about 50 to 60% of the organization's total fundraising. It's money for current use, and it's designed to provide operating support for ongoing programs. Usually it's unrestricted, size isn't relevant, frequency is. We make sure boards know they need to care about the annual giving in the annual fund. There's a tendency, especially with boards that are made up with high rollers, to think only in terms of major gifts or major accomplishments, but the annual fund is foundational. And we tell boards, if you're not getting reports on the annual fund, you should be expecting them or demanding them. At this point, when I'm working with the board, I take them into, let's talk about what the three secrets are of successful fundraising, whether it's being done by a board member, whether it's being done by someone in development, by someone in the organization. The three secrets of successful fundraising are a compelling case for support, committed leadership, and a written development plan that has been shared with the board, and that includes the board's role in it. Compelling case for support is both the verbal case for support and the written case for support. The executive director and any member of the board should be able to say, quickly, what do we do? If someone asks, what do you need? We need money for this. This is what the funds are for. This is why it's important. And this is why someone should support the organization financially. The written case for support addresses the same things in much more detail. It provides details about what you're asking for. It includes all the relevant data a donor would need to make a decision, a brief history of the organization, if you're running a campaign, a detailed view of the campaign, and a frequently asked questions section. Anticipate everything that a donor could potentially ask and put that in the section. Your board members in any campaign, whether it's your annual fund, a capital campaign, a comprehensive campaign, should make up some of your first donors. They also can play a really important role in helping you develop the elevator speech and the written case for support by telling you what questions do they have and what would they want to hear from you if they weren't on the board of directors. Committed leadership is the most important of the three secrets. A charismatic leader can raise funds even with a mediocre case for support. if an organization is beginning a capital campaign, which is where the board has to have the deepest role in it, committed leadership includes the executive director, the development staff, the board of directors, the leadership team of the organization, and appropriate campaign committees. Everyone has to agree to and understand what we're raising money for and how it's going to be used. And that agreement has to govern their behavior. So as a CEO, my largest donor at the Lighthouse typically have been giving us gifts of $25,000 a year. This is our largest individual donor. And we were launching a major initiative that required a good bit of capital. And so we did a quiet capital campaign. And his real passion was our mobile vision clinics. So I got him excited and involved in the purchase of a new mobile vision clinic. Took board members with me to meet with him, took patients, took the woman who runs the clinic. And over the course of 6 months, he said, you know what, I'm going to double my gift. I will pay for the vehicle for the clinic. So gave us a $50,000 gift. We went out and bought a brand new vehicle, had it wrapped, invited him to a special luncheon to thank him for this gift. We had him break a bottle of champagne over it. Well, actually, no, because it would have dented the car. We had him throw some champagne on it, but to christen the clinic. Everyone was aligned. Everyone was agreed. We got what we needed. We did right. I made one mistake. I had everybody on the same page except one member of my board of directors who I invited to the luncheon. Because, I'd gotten the guy to double his gift. My goal for the next year was to get him to give at least that much, but hopefully double it again for another major initiative. Unwittingly, this one member of the board of directors who I had not talked to about my plans sat next to the guy at the luncheon and made a request for $2,500 for a piece of equipment that we needed in one clinic in Savannah. And of course, the donor jumped on it and said, yes, absolutely, I'll write a check right now, and got the heck out of the building. And feeling like he got lucky. It's like the ask was small this time. And I'm like, okay, I got 9 months before I can go back to him with the new ask. That idea of having a team that is bought in, understanding the role and the strategy of the campaign, especially board members, is really critically important and kind of sits on your shoulders as executive director. The third thing, boards have to, board leadership, boards have to participate. They have to be making an annual gift. We tell board members that if you're going to serve on a board of directors, the organization that you're serving on should be one of your top 3 giving priorities. We suggest that boards make a planned gift, meaning that the organization is named in their estate or in their life insurance. If we're running a capital campaign, that they make a meaningful capital campaign gift to them, and they participate in fundraising activities. If we have a golf tournament and you don't golf, you can still participate by sponsoring a hole, showing up for the cocktail reception afterwards. Something that shows that the board is engaged in the fundraising activity. All right, so when we look at board members' fundraising and stewardship duties, like I said, top 1 to 3 personal gifts. Board members can identify and evaluate prospects. Board member can say, I had coffee with this Sam Singer, and I think they're a great prospect. Why don't you go meet them? They can host fundraising and stewardship activities. They don't have to ask for money, but if they can solicit, we want them to. They can support fundraising programs by being present, by sponsoring it. They can offer personal acknowledgments. I am chairman of a statewide nonprofit in Georgia, the Prevent Blindness Georgia. After every event, I have a stack of note cards and a stack of addresses. In addition to thanking major donors or contributors officially, I jot off a personal note and send it to them. And invariably at the next event, people come up and talk to me about the fact that I, as a volunteer, sent them a personal note. Provide leadership and actively advocate. And the last thing, which is important for the board, is ensuring the funds are used as designated, not embezzled by the executive director. The board should have a development committee. The development committee should be much more involved in fundraising at a much more detailed level. They're going to monitor all fundraising activities. They're going to plan for the special initiatives. They should solicit their board peers. The ED should not be the one who solicits the board of directors. The chairman and the board development committee should solicit the other members of the board. They should be active in all the stages of fundraising, identification, cultivation, stewardship, especially if the board's in a campaign. And they should ensure that the organization has sufficient resources. The third element we said is important is the written plan. Every year, the executive director and the head of development should create a plan that says, categorizes who everyone is in the organization who currently funds it, who is going to be solicited. And then that doesn't have to be an plan for every individual donor. It could be for groups of donors. When we're going to solicit them, what we're going to ask for. It should identify by donor groups. What are their major motivations for giving? And how does each donor typically give? How long does it take? And this is the question the board members always want to know. Okay, if we do all this right, how quickly before we start racking in a lot of money? If you meet somebody for the first time as an organization, as a suspect, you meet Ken Hurst today, the earliest, and you're doing cultivation and research effectively, typically the earliest you can expect a donation from Ken is 18 months out. Once Ken has made, sometimes it will happen in 12 months, but we tell people to manage an expectation of 12 to 18 months. If Ken is the most dedicated and engaged donor we have, the first time you can ask them for him for a major gift is 18 months after that first gift. So if we're looking for how long before we got donors that are going to give us really big gifts, fastest is going to happen is 36 months. Now, boards don't necessarily like to hear that. It can be accelerated a little, but consistently, that's what boards should expect. That means if it's going to take 36 months, it's always going to take 36 months. And so boards, if they want to do a capital campaign, if they want to fundraise, need to really be involved in ensuring that the organization is set up for 3 years in advance. I'm going to toggle back out and take any questions. I do want to let you know, so the Blink image there, if you click on that QR code, takes you automatically populates my contact information into your phone. It'll be in the presentation that Brittany's going to send out. We also, at our company, we wrote a book for executive directors who have not fundraised, but more importantly for executive directors to use with their board of directors. It's called Fundraising for All. That link will take you to it. So by my count, I'm bringing this in with about 7 minutes to spare. What questions, thoughts, comments do you have that I can help address? Silence scares me. Yeah.
Okay, we do have a question in the chat from Casey. She said, do you ever work with service nonprofits? Would you have any advice for them specifically?
Sure, absolutely. Casey, tell me what service is your nonprofit in? The vast majority of our nonprofits are service nonprofits.
My nonprofit mostly is the Junior League, but I'm also on the Cleveland County Cultural Arts and Heritage Council.
Oh, wow. First off, those are two great organizations. So yes, we do work with both your types of organizations. With service organizations, the first natural instinct tends to run towards event-based fundraising. Let's throw a gala, let's throw a ball, let's throw a golf tournament. Professional fundraisers left on their own would never throw events, because if you monetize the time that it takes, the staff time, that it takes to put one on, they never cover their costs. The return on investment is ridiculously low. That said, they're important to introduce people to the organization. So I tell organizations to look at events as fundraisers, not fundraisers. There should also be, if you're going to do an event, it should have really tight goals. Typically, no, if the organization raises $1 off event, should not spend more than 35 cents of that dollar to put on the event. And that can be an eye opener for boards. I think the biggest challenge with service organizations is your boards turn over so frequently that whereas many of the boards that I've served on, my term was 3 years, 5 years, and no more than, a quarter of the board turned over every year. I know of service organizations where 50 or 60% of the board turns over every single year. Because of that, the executive director really has to be much more focused on this element of governance training. And essentially, you're always in a teaching mode with your board, both governance in general, but also on fundraising in particular. That just because I explained it to Ernie Dinkelflatt when he was on the board last year, now that his wife Eleanor Dinkelflatt's on the board instead, I can't assume she knows it. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, it was. Thank you.
We've got another question in the chat. What is the best written or data resource that could convince a board that galas are not effective fundraisers?
Oh, I put it in the book. So I'll say my book first, just shameless plug. In terms of the best resource, I rely on Candid. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the organization that holds all of the nonprofits accountable for our performance. Anyway, the organizations that
Star. You
I'm
think
sorry,
about GuideStar? You think about GuideStar?
GuideStar, yes, thank you.
By the way, I'm the one who asked the question. If you weren't in the chat,
No.
because okay, this is true confession. Every single nonprofit board that I've served on, they're all addicted to galas.
Yep.
And I tell them, I'm not going to serve on this board if you're addicted to galas. I want you to addicted to face-to-face solicitation.
Yeah. Well, I think that to that point, that GuideStar element, first of all, there's two elements I think in GuideStar are very useful. The expectation is that all fundraising should be only about 35 cents on every dollar raised. That's really eye-opening for boards to understand that's the expectation and the benchmark you hold them against. The thing with galas, I don't have any problem with a gala. I've served on gala committees as long as they are really tightly budgeted and mostly driven by volunteers. Where a board, part of how you hold that cost of the event down is we're not expecting Dave as the CEO or Sarah as the chief development officer to spend their time picking flowers and tasting hors d'oeuvres. That's something a volunteer can do that is helpful and useful. To say to a board member, here's your budget. You got to bring your flowers in under this amount, and you got to bring your hors d'oeuvres in under this amount. Go, because our most valuable role is that face-to-face fundraising.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for a wonderful program. Everyone, you will be getting an email from me with a link to today's presentation and recording, a short survey, and an opportunity to sign up to be a Carey Center nonprofit affiliate. The Carey Center Nonprofit Affiliate Program currently serves over 325 nonprofits in Alabama and beyond, and offers educational programming, professional development, and networking opportunities to nonprofit professionals. Carey Center nonprofit affiliates are the first to learn about upcoming programming, and membership is free. We are excited to announce we are now offering the Carey Center Nonprofit Professional Certificate. This is an online, non-degreed certificate offered through a partnership with the Auburn University Office of Continuing and Professional Education and Merit Nonprofit Professional Development, and provides a tailored curriculum for nonprofit professionals. It is an anytime, anywhere micro-learning platform that builds 6 core nonprofit proficiency areas, including leading, learning, resource generating, planning, managing, and overseeing through 28 different learning paths. Thank you, Dave, again, and everyone, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you at one of our monthly virtual programs or in person for our nonprofit training series currently traveling the state.
Thank you all. I enjoyed being with you.
Thanks.